I actually wanted to own my own restaurant. So you never know, there might actually still be a Maike Bistro at one point in time. And I kept saying, I don't want to really work in a bank. I stayed there in total for about 17 to 18 years. Until I was 40, I was in a slipstream. I was just on an automatic pilot. And that was a pivotal moment for me. Like, okay, you can do really well. You can be the best in class. You can meet all your targets, all your KPIs, but then you can still not get chosen. So in order to kind of get what you want, you have to ask for it.
Imagine dedicating 25 years to the world of finance and tech, reaching a role of the CEO at Visa Hong Kong and Macau. That's Maaike Steinebach's story, but she chose a different one in 2023. She left her corporate career and founded FemTechFuture, a project committed to improving women's lives in all aspects, from finance to health, while supporting women-led startups and exploring Web3. In the same year, she became a co-CEO of the Femtech Association Asia, devoted to develop Asia-Pacific's first Femtech network and advisory service.
When I told my parents I'm going to be working in Femtech and Sextech, and my mother's mouth literally went like...
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be, but I will tell you in a few years' time whether it was meant to be. I've kind of found my place.
Hi, Maike. I'm so happy to see you today.
Hi, Annie. How are you? I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you. What were the events and history that made you what you are today?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I find that a very difficult question because I feel there are so many dimensions to that. But when I was growing up, it's really interesting. I actually wanted to own my own restaurant. And I'd actually made a whole design about what my restaurant was going to look like. And I recently found it actually at my parents' home. So you never know, there might actually still be a Maike Bistro at one point in time. But I actually wanted to go to hotel management school. And my parents said, so this was like early 90s. They were like, well, that's not really, a university degree. So why don't you go and study something that's a little bit more useful going forward? So I ended up studying economics, which I was really a little bit reluctant to do, actually. And during my kind of final project, I had an opportunity to go to South Africa. And I met some people, and I did an internship at a bank on trade and commodity finance, but in particular how the trade routes were rerouting following the sanctions in South Africa with Southern Africa. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I met some people there from a Dutch merchant bank, and they said, when you're done with your studies, would you like to apply for a traineeship? And I said, well, I'm not sure I want to work at a bank. I actually want to work maybe in marketing and consumer goods. But anyway, then you're young, you graduate, the job market is not very good. You have your parents telling me, like, why don't you, apply? You never know what happens. And actually, I wrote one letter in my whole life and I got a job. And I kept saying, I don't want to really work in a bank. But anyway, with a lot of outside pressure, they were like, well, you can always quit and you can always do something differently. But then I never did. I stayed there in total for about 17 to 18 years. So I started at the cappuccino desk. So coffee, cocoa, dairy, and sugar. And I had an amazing opportunity to travel all around the equator because that's actually where all the coffee and cocoa comes from. And I was actually raised in Saudi Arabia. So at a very young age, my parents moved there, took me and my two brothers. So from a very early age on, I had a really great experience in meeting people from different cultures and different backgrounds. And I think that kind of fostered my curiosity and maybe also my love for travel. So I really, really loved my job because it was a combination, I would say, of finance and people. I had an amazing opportunity to go to Indonesia and visit some of the coffee and cocoa plantations in Sulawesi. And when I came back and was there, I was like, okay, I need to live here at one point in time in my life. So when I finished uni, started my first job, I had a boyfriend, and we basically said, whoever has the first opportunity to kind of move abroad will take. So after I had spent 5 years at the cappuccino desk, my boss said, would you like to move to London and try your hand at hard commodities, so oil and gas and coking coal and steel and iron ore? And I was like, not really sure, but I was really keen to go to London. And I asked my boyfriend at the time, I said, are you in? And he goes, yep, I'm joining. So we moved to London, spent a few years there, very, very happily. And then I got married whilst I was there too. And then I was 5 months pregnant, and my boss, it has to be a guy, right? But anyway, 5 months pregnant, he said to me, we have a really good idea. Why don't you move to Singapore to become the regional head of trade and commodity finance? And I said, are you out of your mind? I'm having a baby, first child, could get postnatally depressed. I've never done any leadership roles, never worked in a different culture, or never worked in Asia. But he really, in a true he for she moment, he said, why don't you do it? Because we have faith in you. So in 2003, we moved to Singapore, and I had teams all across the region. But actually my China team just obtained a new license and needed help. So after a year and a half, 2 years, I moved to China. Spent 5 years in China. And as this goes, sometimes in your career, maybe we can talk about it later, but with every country move, you kind of normally keep your same job, but they add on some responsibilities. Yeah. So I became regional head of TCF. Then I became regional head of kind of oil and gas, energy and transportation. Then I became regional head of the institutional bank. And then I became the country head. So in 2009, during the global financial crisis, I was in China, and the bank I worked for was nationalized. And I was asked, do you want to come back to the Netherlands, or do you want to move to Hong Kong and try and help rebuild kind of the new bank, which I gladly accepted because I felt that my international career wasn't finished yet. During my time in Hong Kong, I moved from this Dutch bank to Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Spent 5 years there, but that was really a pivotal moment in my career because it started to trigger my interest in innovation and also got me into the fintech space. That got me through a lot of different ways into the Fintech Association, and that got me then my next role at Visa in tech. So that's just very short about my corporate career.
When you started your career, how did you imagine it? Did you imagine what you have now, or nothing to do with it?
No, not at all. Not at all. It wasn't. To be honest, I really felt that so I'm 52, but until I was 40, I was in a slipstream. I was just on an automatic pilot, and, life happens because apart from work, you also get married, you have children, and you're basically not consciously, I would say, making decisions around your career. So yes, we made a conscious decision to kind of move abroad. But once that wheel was in motion, I think it was a lot of autopilot, actually. And that has good things and bad things, I think. The good thing is that, the wheel keeps on moving and you get a lot of different opportunities, a lot of chances. The bad thing is, does it really always connect with what you believe and what your purpose is?
So what happened after that, and how did you plan your moves after that?
There was a moment in my career when I first became, let's say, a proper country manager. That was really a reaction to an action. So there were actually two candidates. There was a guy and there was me, or at least I thought there were two candidates. But there were actually not two candidates. From the perspective of the bank, there was only one candidate, which was the guy. And I was so convinced that somebody would actually come to me and say, hey, this is the process. This is how we're going to run the selection. But basically, there was just an announcement that the other guy had been appointed. And that was a pivotal moment for me. Like, okay, you can do really well. You can be the best in class. You can, meet all your targets, all your KPIs, but then you can still not get chosen. So in order to kind of get what you want, you apparently have to ask for it. So that was a big change for me. So I didn't get it at that point in time, but I did get it 2 years later after he left. So that was a big change for me to kind of think about like, hey, you need to actually ask for what you want. That was number one. Number two, the reckoning came when I was 40, and you know Hong Kong very well. I was CEO of ABN AMRO. I sat in the ICC office, corner office overlooking the harbor, and I thought, dang girl, you did pretty well. But I also realized actually that I'd been very lucky because, you know, my parents had been very supportive in, you know, taking me abroad and exposing me to all these different cultures. I had a supportive partner. I've had supportive bosses. But I was speaking to a lot more women around me that were struggling, that were kind of having the glass ceiling bumped or having stories about harassments or bullying. And I thought, okay, you know, now it's time to start giving back. So I started mentoring some women through the Women's Foundation, got more involved there, and then slowly but surely had at one point in time probably 6 women that I was mentoring. But that was also a moment where I really started to recognize the power of the women's network and how supportive women are to actually bring each other forward and lift each other up. And I felt that was a really, really powerful experience, actually, both for myself, but also for me, it was so easy to help these women and give them what, in my view, was very simple advice. But I got messages from some of these women later on that were like, okay, you told me this, and that was a game changer for me. So I really started to realize how beautiful the idea of actually empowering other women was, and how great it is to do that when you're in a senior position or a position where you have that experience.
Great. I remember you were very active in the Women's Foundation. And that's how we met for the second time, remember?
Yes, correct. But what is interesting is what I really like about the Women's Network is that, you know, it is an extremely supportive network. But my biggest frustration after a while became that we needed to engage the men in this, because I was for a while of the view that the future is female. But I've actually over years have changed that to the future has to be equal. And I started to notice in financial services that, you know, there were a lot more women that could use our support and help. But when I got more involved in the innovation and the technology space, I started to realize it was even worse there, that, you know, in financial services, there were policies, you know, there were very, you know, strong leaders that were actually thinking about D&I, but actually in the tech space, it was very bad. So when we first in Hong Kong got together to think about the Fintech Association, and I realized very early on that I was only surrounded by men, I literally grabbed a few women that were also in this space and said, okay, you're also going to sit at the table because, you know, we're half the world's population. We need to have a voice here. And one voice is small, but 5 voices become a little bit more powerful. And that's how I started both my female empowerment and tech journey, but also my love and interest for technology, because I started to realize how powerful technology can be to actually work towards that gender equality, actually.
What are these qualities, knowledge, experience that helped you the most to be promoted, to be noticed, to get the CEO job? What are these?
Probably the most important advice for me is to be authentic. So I think a lot of people try and be different in the workplace than they are maybe at home as a person. And then they also become different when they actually are promoted into more senior positions. And I also experienced that firsthand when I first moved to Singapore and I was leading a team. I actually thought I needed to be a leader and I needed to say all these smart things and show that I was really smart and show that I deserved this position. And in hindsight, I made such a fool of myself, honestly, because, you know, I was miserable because you can't play act being somebody else for a very, very long time. But also I realized actually that when my bosses asked me to take this job, it wasn't because I was this leader. It was actually because I was the person that I still am today, which is somebody that is curious and somebody that is authentic and somebody that has a very high EQ. So I think it is very important for a leader to have a high EQ. I also think it's important to be able to listen. I think a lot of people that are in senior positions tend to talk a lot, but actually you can learn a lot more from your staff and your clients if you actually are quiet, which is quite hard because I'm also quite extrovert, and extroverted people tend to get into leadership roles easier than introverted people. So I also sometimes had to write down on my notebook, which said listen at the top instead of talk. And I learned also that the hard way in China when I had my first leadership team meeting. And we had an agenda and I said, okay, let's do this, this, and this. And everybody said, okay. And then the meeting was over. And I was like, okay, this is not going to go the way I wanted. So then the next meeting, I got everybody back and I said, listen, I'm going to empower you to actually do your job. And I know that is quite difficult in a hierarchical situation, but I'm giving you the responsibility to take your own decisions and empower you to make those own decisions. And if you don't want that or you're uncomfortable with that, we can talk about it. I can give you a different role. But if you're a CFO or a CMO or a CTO, you were hired to do a job and you should actually own that space. And I've really enjoyed doing that too. So I think empowering people, listening to your team and really being authentic, with all the pluses and the minuses, I think has made me, in any case, a successful leader.
And what would you say to those young people who are starting their careers? What should they try and learn? Which areas should they look at?
So I think they should be curious. I think what is really important is to be open to learn other things, build your network, say yes to a lot of things. Would you like to do an internship? Yes. Would you like to work in another department? Yes. I still see a lot of the children of my friends that are now joining, let's say, financial services, and they all join a team and they are so afraid to kind of go off that path that they are being put on because they worry that they won't be seen as being serious about the role or about the company. And I think really, say yes to other opportunities, look for other things, but also, and I tell that a lot actually to women, if you're unhappy, so if you find out you've taken a role that is not suitable for you, you really need to quit that job because your mental well-being and your physical well-being is so much more important than your paycheck. And I know that it's super, super hard because everybody has to pay the bills. But I think it is really worthwhile to spend a bit of time, even if you do that from your existing job, but to figure out what it is that you like about your job and what you don't like about it when you kind of think about your next job. Because like me, a lot of people just roll into that first job, either because they get recruited at university or, they just apply for every internship or traineeship that is there. But actually thinking about what is the culture in a company, what is the role, and what are my own values that I want to live by, I think is super important.
Great. And what about the mid-career professionals? Because there's so many changes that happened in the last 5 years and it's accelerating, it's not slowing down. And jobs that didn't exist 5 years now exist, others that existed now don't. So how would a mid-career professional, what should they strive to do?
Okay, that's a hard one. Because, I still think they should be curious. And, I actually moved over from financial services into tech, even though I have no tech background whatsoever. And a lot of people say like, yeah, but how do you do that? And I said, I literally started with, just subscribing to an app that gave me information. So you have apps like Flipboard where you can just subscribe and you get articles. So I just started reading, I started listening to podcasts. But I also started talking to people. And I think a lot of people mid-career don't network enough. But I literally in my calendar made 1 to 2 slots a week for people to have coffee with. And one would be somebody that I knew, but that was in my network, but not in the same business, just to stay connected about what's happening. And the other one, and I know it sounds very random, but was somebody that would have connected with me via LinkedIn and had asked me for a coffee. Because you learn so much from other people. You learn so much from what's happening in the world, what's happening in other areas. And through that way, you can also listen and learn to your own heart and be inspired by others and maybe think about, what's next through that. And I think a lot of people fail to even network within their own organizations enough to even, understand what is happening or what the opportunities are within their own organization.
Actually, what you said is what I did, let's say 5 years ago. And that was the reason why I at one point left banking, because I suddenly saw all these opportunities outside, which were so interesting. And I was thinking, why do I continue? Can I try something different? So you never know what kind of opportunity or interesting thing can come out from just a meeting that you never expected anything from.
Yes, exactly. That is also how I ended up with Commonwealth Bank of Australia, because I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, but somebody approached me for a cup of coffee. And to your point, I was so discouraged, let's say, by how innovation was happening in banking that I thought, okay, I will give it one more shot, but then I will have a look at the most innovative bank, which happened to be Commonwealth Bank of Australia in Australia. But when somebody called me about it, I literally had to Google it and type it when I'd never heard of the bank. But then I did a little bit of digging and, they had a mobile first, they had a lot of initiatives, which later on I'm really thankful for that I took that one meeting and that one call, because it changed my whole outlook on financial services, but also my outlook as a leader and what we have as a leader as responsibilities to educate our people on the changes that are happening in the world as well.
Talking about change.
Yes.
Let's talk about your recent change.
Yes.
Leaping in the unknown.
Yes.
How and why did you decide to leave your job at Visa, and you were head for Hong Kong and Macau, right?
Yes.
So it's a big job. Why did you do it?
So in 2018, I was made redundant at Commonwealth Bank of Australia because they were downsizing their international presence, and I had some time off. And I'd heard of the term Femtech through my tech network, and I started to look into it, and I came across a few companies in Hong Kong that were active in this space, that were doing fertility trackers and breast cancer detection. So then the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, they said, would you like to organize an event on Femtech? But they said, you can showcase everything, but no sex. So we can't talk about sex, no sex toys, nothing. So I said, okay, fine. So we did a whole event just on technology specifically for women, from STEM to these health tech companies. And I thought, wow, this is actually really interesting, because it gives women kind of the opportunity to own their own well-being again. Because, if we're half of the world, we have over 65% of all the health issues versus men, but we get only 3% of research and development is allocated towards women's health. So we are very reliant on the traditional healthcare system to basically help us out. But what I learned through the breast cancer detection startup that I worked with in 2018, only 10% of women in Hong Kong actually show up for their mammogram when they make an appointment. So I thought that was appalling, because, if we don't do all this, if we don't do mammograms, if we don't do pap smears, we're very likely to, if the cancer goes undetected, it has big problems for us. But also we have twice as much chances of getting depressed, for example. So we really need to take care of our well-being as women. So, but then I thought, how am I ever going to do this? So when an opportunity came along to work for Visa, I was very excited because I thought fast moving, payments, technology, I'm really excited about it. And it was an amazing few years, obviously tough because there were protests in Hong Kong and there was COVID. So not the best time to start in a new industry. I'd really never done payments. I'd also never done like consumer marketing before. I'd really been in the B2B and institutional banking space. But Visa was keen to expand into fintechs, which is why they asked me to join. And I think we were very successful and it was really a wonderful time. But then whilst everybody was doing courses at MIT or Harvard, I came across Sextech School. And Sextech School is run by the world's leading sextech expert. Her name is Brownie Cole. She was stuck in Melbourne and she was normally based in New York, but because of COVID, she was stuck in Melbourne. And she started Sextech School, which is, it's almost like a mini incubator for people that want to understand what sextech is about and have an idea about working in this space. Now, a lot of misconceptions because everybody thinks sex tech is about pornography and sex toys, but actually it's really around sexual wellness in the widest thing. So firstly, a very inclusive way of looking at sex, but also really looking at what are the problems. So this can be people that have endometriosis or people that have pain or, sex toys for handicapped people, or how do we create a better and more inclusive space for LGBTQ people? Anyway, it was super interesting and eye-opening to see the kind of community and the creativity that was coming out of this community. And then particularly the stuff that was focused on women, I got very excited about. But anyway, went back to my day job and kind of as always, you get going again. And then, following a summer holiday, my husband came home and said, listen, my mother, she's 92. I really feel we need to start thinking about making a change and maybe spending more time in Europe. And then I thought, okay, well, this is actually the moment, because if we would move back to Europe, what do I want? So firstly, I've learned now over time that I want to work flexibly, and I want to work, for different people, because I'm curious about so many different things. I don't want to have one employer. I don't want to work in one place, and I don't want to work full time. And I want to have that freedom to decide how and where I work. So, going back in circles and circles, the circle kept coming back to, then you need to become an entrepreneur and start your own company. So the original plan was to look at how I could work with Bryony on Sextech School, and I'm still doing that. But in the meantime, it has already pivoted in multiple different directions.
Yeah. As it happens.
Exactly, as it happens. And I had underestimated that because I just thought that, a lot of people would be very surprised by me saying, hey, I'm now actually working in women's health, and I'm working not just on physical and mental well-being, but also sexual well-being. But I was so surprised how many people came to me and said, yeah, of course you were going to do this. We all knew this. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting how, people see things in you that you don't see yourself, right? So people literally came to me like, oh, we're so not surprised. And then if you kind of have that opportunity to do multiple different things, in the beginning, it's a little bit overwhelming because there are so many things coming your way, both people from your corporate life that are like, hey, you're free. Can you come work for us? Or can you do things for us? Or the entrepreneurs. So it's been 2 months and I'm now slowly but surely kind of finding my way and figuring out what I'm going to be doing, at least until the end of the year. I was originally also thinking I'm actually going to start my own company and my own idea, let's say my own startup. But I've already realized that that's not where my strength lies. My strength is actually, and it sounds so weird, but my strength is actually in the fact that I have 25 years of working experience, that I have life experience, and that I can actually apply that life experience to support others that are on this entrepreneurial journey and are just starting and who are desperate to hear that things are going to be okay, that you shouldn't focus just on the short term, but you should keep the eye on the prize in the future, and that there is a whole world out there of opportunities that if you just, open your mind and keep a growth mindset, everything's going to be okay. So yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, well, that thing that you said about your career, I had the same, the fact that I had 25 years of banking career helped me so much, actually, every day.
Yeah.
Everything I do is because I did that.
Yeah.
So, it was meant to be.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if it was meant to be, but I will tell you in a few years' time whether it was meant to be. But I can tell you, I haven't felt as close to my purpose and my values now than I've ever felt. So I would say that I was, pretty good at what I did because I love people and I'm curious and I love learning new things. But now I feel that I've kind of found my place. And at least for the next few years, I want to do a deep dive onto this, and see where this portfolio career takes me. And I hope I can continue some of my corporate experience and apply that, to more of non-executive director roles, but also really look forward into, having a bit bigger impact on society through the focus on women's health and technology.
Great. And, how do you think about this change in financial terms? What kind of plans you had to do?
So as I mentioned, my husband mentioned, he planted the seeds to say, shall we move back home? So we are actually moving back to Europe. At least I will commute back and forth. So there is clearly a different financial picture, I would say, in Europe than there is in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is an expensive place to live if you're an entrepreneur. Almost, you've kind of become addicted to your paycheck. And now all of a sudden, when you start to live more consciously about how you spend and what you spend, it's actually really interesting how much you can save and how differently you can actually still live a very fulfilling life just to being a bit more careful. The other thing is also just looking at your overall portfolio of investments and actually saying, are we optimizing this? Should we change something? It's really interesting. If you have your financials in order because you just get a paycheck, you almost become a bit complacent. And I actually find it a bit annoying also that I'm a female in banking that has spent their whole career there. And now looking back is like, oh my God, you could have done so much better. So I didn't do bad, but you could have done so much better by just spending a bit more time on this. But anyway, we're busy having children, raising children, taking care of employees, that this was not a priority. But we have a buffer, and I also have some paid work already, which is great. And basically, my husband and I have said we're going to see how this goes for 2 years, and then we will make a decision whether this is worth it. But to be honest, I feel this is going to be totally fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you make it this way, right? Nobody else.
No, exactly. No, but there is, it's interesting because the first time not receiving a paycheck in 25 years.
It's appalling.
Is a little bit, should be a little bit daunting, but, and everybody said to me, oh, you're going to find that really hard. I'm so convinced that I'm doing the right thing that I wasn't even that worried about it. It was like, yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Just keep going, keep going, keep going.
Yeah, what you said about planning, financial planning, I had the same. Although, I was always very cautious about, I never spent like splashing and spending money like for nothing. But you're right that everybody have to actually do their financial planning every month and see what can they invest, what are the expenses they can cut, etc. Because you sit and review this, and we looked with my husband before I was leaving, and you see, suddenly you see things you never saw before, and I was like, why didn't we do that earlier?
So I'm also not saying that we were kind of spending, lavishly, but it's like subscriptions that you have that you rarely use. It's all these kind of small things that all add up. And it's like, is this really necessary? I'm quite enjoying it. I feel lighter. It's good.
Great. So I think we should do this again in 2 years and see
Yes.
how life changed. That would be very interesting.
Yes.
But before, I mean, we're not over yet.
No. Yeah.
So tell me, before you made the change, what were the most difficult decisions you had to take? What were these mental blocks you had to deal with? And that's, again, for the listeners, what are the pitfalls and what should they prepare, think about?
Yeah. So firstly, maybe I can, when you say talk about the listeners, it reminded me a little bit that when I resigned at Visa, I think people were very confused. They were like, why would you leave this job? You know, it's fun. It's well paid. You're doing great. But I said to them, I feel it's not fulfilling. I feel I'm underutilized. I'm not utilizing my full capabilities. I'm too far away from decisions making and having a real impact. And I really want my legacy to be impactful, that I've really, introducing the digital octopus is great, but it's not, something that I was kind of excited about leaving as a legacy. So that was number one. I also said it took me 52 years, but I found my purpose. I found that this is something, being able to support companies that are closing the gap between supply and demand for healthcare for women and just making their life better and easier and democratizing that access. I think that is really what makes me tick. And it was wonderful to have found that. The difficult thing was, well, firstly, from a financial perspective, how do you make sure you do this correctly? And I was also putting quite a bit of burden and financial stress on my partner, because it was like all of a sudden he felt pressure like to now be, a big contributor to that and stay in a job and what have you. So having conversations about that. I think the other thing was also the area that I've moved in, which is around women's well-being, which also includes sexual wellness. I also needed to have a conversation with my children. And I was like, hey, mom's going to be talking about this stuff. You might find me online. How do you feel about this? Are you comfortable with it? And it was super interesting because, one of my children was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. And all my friends and why do you always have to be that person that comes up with this stuff? But I have to say, my youngest son was like, okay, is this your job now? Is this what is going to make you happy and bring in money? And if so, yeah, I'm fully supportive, because this is your job now, right? This is what comes with the terrain. It's also very funny because when I told my parents, we were on a family Zoom to kind of say, hey, there's going to be some life changes happening, and we're partly coming back to Europe, and we're also changing jobs. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be working in Femtech and Sextech, and my mother's mouth literally went like, oh. Coming back to that, what is really interesting is you feel that there's a lot of burdens here. You're like, oh my God, how am I going to feel comfortable about talking about this stuff? Or how are the people around me going to respond? And I can tell you, 99.9% of the people have responded much better than I had expected. They were all like, this is amazing. The amount of messages I get in my direct messaging, to say, oh my God, we're so excited. This is so needed. This is so honorable that you're doing this. And even it's very funny, my father now, sends me newspaper clippings from the Dutch newspaper about the vagina biome, like, hey, this is a really interesting technology, you should understand this. I think every family responds differently, right? But I think the message here is you have expectations on how people are going to respond to your changes, and they're going to be totally different from what you expect. So if you just don't expect anything and just do it because you feel comfortable in doing it, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And whatever the haters or the people that don't like it or have an opinion on it, you can just ignore. So just go and do it. Do it.
We are towards the end of the podcast, unfortunately. I can sit here, talk to you another 2 hours for sure. But, from your experience so far, from the change you did, what would you say are the top 3 pieces of advice you can give to people who want to make a career change? What are the most important things that helped you?
Yeah, so I spent quite a bit of time actually writing down a lot of things, actually, both the pros and the cons. But I also spent a lot of time thinking about what is it that I really enjoy doing. So I really looked at my existing job and thought, what is the stuff that I really like and what is it that I don't like? So I think that is very, very important. The other thing is really speak to as many people as you can. And you will be surprised how many people are actually open to talk to you. And, obviously I won't be able to talk to everybody that contacts me on LinkedIn, but I really, really try and make the effort to meet with people. So you will be surprised how many people are actually open to connect and talk, and also talk to outliers. So I literally made a list of people that I knew of, but that I did not know, but that I was kind of excited about having a coffee with. So I approached all of them just to understand, what happens in your industry? Is this fun? Is this not fun? And thirdly, and I know that sounds very weird, but don't listen to your parents or don't listen to your family and friends, but follow your own heart. And the reason why I'm saying is particularly for the listeners in Asia, because I know there is so much pressure to kind of be supporting financially your family, but also, decision making around a lot of these things take place in the family. And there is still a bit of a stigma around entrepreneurship. And I know it's super hard. But, for people, if you do want to become an entrepreneur or even want to change job or want to go and work in a startup or in a tech company or something that is an outlier, just follow your heart. At the end of the day, it's your life and you're the only person that you owe anything to is to yourself and to nobody else. So really, don't listen too much to your parents and the people around you.
Great. That's a great ending for our podcast. Thank you, Maaike. I wish you absolutely all the best.
Thank you.
Definitely keep in touch.
Yes, look forward to that. And thank you so much for having me today.
This is all for today. Thank you for being with me till the end. And before you go, I have a huge favor to ask. Would you please subscribe or leave a message and send us any comments and recommendations? The more we hear from you, the better this podcast will be. Thank you for now and see you in the next episode.